Joining us today, Duane Mitchell, MD, Ph.D. He's co-director of the University of Florida's Preston A. Wells Jr. Center for Brain Tumor Therapy, one of the largest tumor centers in the United States, and it's dedicated to brain tumor research and clinical care. Dr. Mitchell, like Jimmy V, a graduate from Rutgers University as well, so we love that. And welcome, Dr. Mitchell. Great to see you.
It's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Look forward to talking about the amazing research that you're doing. It's always great seeing you at some of our V Foundation events like Wine Celebration in Napa or Dick Vitale Gala in Sarasota. And before we get into the research, I kind of wanted to start with a little research I did, and I realized that you are inspired by the great Jack Handy of Saturday Night Live fame. So I got to know more about this. A favorite saying of his, because my sister is too. She loves him, so we always get a kick out of him.
Sure. So no, you're you obviously looked at some clips from a graduation actual speech I had the honor of giving for the PhD graduating class here at the University of Florida. And I like to collect quotes that are memorable and that I think have life lessons in them. And Jack, for those of us who are old enough to remember or have followed
That's right.
Saturday
Yeah.
Night Live, Jack Handy has some interesting life philosophies and quotes that I was able to weave into the ceremonial speech. But he's not on my all-time favorite list. It just fit with the with the topic of discussion on that day. Which was really, the lesson really was going for the best. If you have an option to settle for good or try for great, take the risk and go after great. So that was,
I love it.
yeah.
Great message, and I'm sure that sharing his inspiration got some good laughs as you were giving the speech too, right?
Well, it was my first time giving a talk, and I was a little bit nervous myself preparing for it. I've given lots of presentations, of course, on my research, and talking about your career, but figuring out what at a commencement address are people really going to relate to or be memorable. So I tried. It was my attempt to try to weave some humor into what was hopefully an inspirational and serious message for those future scientists and leaders coming out of our graduate program.
Well, yeah, I think for sure. I love the message of be the best. And that's obviously a focus here at the V Foundation is to fund the best researchers and scientists in the country like yourself. And let's talk a little bit about that. We were honored to first work with you in 2017. So talk a little bit about how has that support helped you in your career and also the partnership overall between the V Foundation, yourself, and the University of Florida.
Sure. I was honored to receive a V Foundation Translational Research Award in 2017 that has been focused on supporting our efforts to develop effective and personalized immunotherapy treatments for children with high-grade malignant brain tumors. Specifically, that grant focused on medulloblastoma, which is the most common malignant brain tumor in children. And we know from studies from others in the field that even though these children share a common diagnosis at the biological level, these tumors are quite distinct from one another and what we call heterogeneous. And in many instances, really individual to that particular patient. And so our laboratory has been working on how can we, use the immune system to recognize these cancers as foreign invaders in the brain, and then ideally elicit a strong enough immune response that they can eradicate those brain tumor cells while leaving the normal brain unharmed. And so the approach we've taken and that the V Foundation has supported in that is developing what we call a precision adoptive cell therapy approach, which is a long name for basically saying we harvest the cells of the immune system and train them, if you will, for lack of a better way of describing it, in the laboratory to recognize a patient's own cancer as a unique entity that should be attacked. And then we grow those activated and trained immune cells called T cells to very large numbers and return them back to the patient with the hopes that now these fully activated and sort of honed in on the tumor cell directed T cells can now travel to the brain and kill those tumor cells. And so getting this grant was really important for advancing how we use technology to figure out what the immune system can recognize, and then how we can individualize that information so that each patient could receive a very unique and personalized immunotherapy treatment.
And we're excited to fund new research from you here in 2022 that builds on the research you did in 2017. As you mentioned, all tied to helping children who are battling brain cancer. How will the research you are doing now build on what you began in 2017?
Great. No, so we were, quite fortunate that the V Foundation agreed to continue to support this work. We made tremendous progress in demonstrating proof of concept in what we call preclinical studies in a laboratory environment, that you could, in fact, identify these unique antigens or unique targets for the immune system within cancer cells, medulloblastoma tumors. We also expanded that to another common pediatric brain tumor called malignant gliomas. And now we are actually at the stages of wanting to move this approach from a preclinical setting in the laboratory into actual clinical trials for first in human testing in children with malignant brain tumors that have not responded to standard treatment. And so the work that the V Foundation is funding for the subsequent 2 years is to actually do what we call the Food and Drug Administration investigational new drug enabling studies. Again, a long term for describing the work you need to do in terms of showing safety, feasibility, the effectiveness, and the process by which you can scale this up to be applicable and relevant to treat a human patient. That's an extensive amount of work, and when that body of work is what we call an IND, or an investigational new drug application. And so we are working over this coming 2 year period to advance the work from the lab into the actual clinic. And this funding will bridge that gap to get us into clinical trials for patients that are in need of new therapies.
And take us through that timeline of when it would get to clinical trial. How long are we talking from a timeline perspective?
So when you really look at the process of either discovery or an idea, a hypothesis that you think, hey, this is an approach that we think could work to improve therapeutic options for children with brain cancer, or you make an observation that you feel, hey, this I think has relevance, and we should start testing whether this could be an improvement in the way we're currently treating these tumors. That process to go from the initial, I would say, idea conceptual framework into clinical trials typically is many years. What we have been able to do, both as an emphasis in our program as well as with the funding from the V Foundation, is our lab really does focus on discovering and developing new therapeutic treatments for brain tumors, both children and adults. And we really use a team science approach so that we have teams that are devoted to the laboratory discovery work. And then we have others that really specialize in how you move those discoveries into clinical application. And then we have clinical research teams that really are focused on how do you execute these new and complex clinical trials. And so because of that teamwork, it is the sort of great example of it takes a village to really translate a therapy. But it does accelerate the process. And so we will, from the conceptual framework of this T-cell platform to ultimately what we think would be our first in human clinical trial of this approach, you're probably talking a 7-year journey total. But from where we are now, we think we're about 18 to 24 months away from being able to start clinical trials with this work.
And it can't be said enough how important the work you're doing is, with pediatric cancer being the number one, lack of a better term, killer of children, and also brain cancer being number one. It used to be leukemia, thanks to research. Now, leukemia isn't number one. More children are surviving from that. Take us through the importance of the work you're doing here to address brain cancer in children.
Quite frankly, when we look at the progress for new treatments for malignant brain tumors in children and in adults, we really have not seen significant breakthroughs in many decades. We've learned a tremendous amount about the biology of these tumors. We understand significantly more about how to classify and more accurately diagnose and really understand what are the really high risk or aggressive tumors and which tumor types may be more amenable to curative or much more effective therapies. But in terms of new modalities that really can change the clinical course for the most aggressive pediatric brain tumors, we've not seen a major advance in that opportunity, really in decades. And so there's a clear, present, and urgent need to develop new therapies, and importantly, to ideally develop therapies that are safe and more tolerable and less toxic to the nervous system. Because the other real sort of devastating consequence that we deal with is because of the sensitive nature of the brain. It's obviously the control center for who we are as personhood, individuals, and functionally. The effects of some of the treatments that we deliver on the children's nervous system, even when they are curative and effective at controlling the tumor, they can have devastating effects on the neurologic development of those children. So ultimately, we need to not just improve the standard of care, but really work towards a new standard of care in the future that uses much more precise and much less toxic therapies to treat these aggressive cancers.
As you talk about that new standard of care in the future, how does that tie back to what you were sharing before about the importance of more individualized therapies for people?
It's extremely critical that we develop ways of addressing the what we call the individual uniqueness of people's tumors. One of the things that we now know clearly from really fantastic advances in basic research and the advance of technologies that allow us to do sequencing and understand the genes and the proteins that are expressed in cancer cells at a very deep level, is we know that two people with the same diagnosis and the tumors that look very similar under the microscope, when you get down to the genes or the biology of what's driving those cancers, they can be completely different between two people with the same named cancer. Not only that, some of the cells within that individual patient actually have unique drivers for those cancer cells compared to some of the others, or unique features, which really means that each patient is a unique, and we know this at the individual level, we're all unique. It's not somewhat surprising that the cancers that arise in patients are all unique. And yet we pretty much treat people with, the same approach for the most part based on their diagnosis. That's changing a lot now with our understanding of this biology. We now do separate patients into what we call subgroups of cancers, and sometimes we know better approaches or better treatments that are relevant for those subgroups, and that has revolutionized the treatment of some cancers. But there's still a complexity that we know we don't yet address on how to individualize every treatment. And so the vision that we think we have, one of the reasons we're so passionate about immunotherapy, I think immunotherapy is the quintessential individualized treatment. Your immune system is uniquely adapted and tuned to respond to threats in your body. And it's the reason why, if you're trying to do a transplant between two individuals, one of the big challenges is their immune system recognizes that organ doesn't belong to them, and oftentimes will reject it. It's one of the challenges we have in transplant, but it's one of the beautiful advantages we have in developing vaccines or protection against infections. What we need to do is kind of harness that understanding and really make it very effective against cancer.
You mentioned vaccine, and the word vaccine has definitely been probably said more and shared more in the last 2.5 years than ever before. In the future, do you think there will be a vaccine for cancer? And if so, would it be by cancer type? Would it be by person? It can't just be like the flu shot, right? It'd be a lot more complex, or not. I'm fascinated because I've heard you talk about this in the past, cancer vaccine, but I'm sure there's a lot to that.
Yes, yes. So the term, I'll answer your question two ways. The when most people talk about cancer vaccines, we are usually referring to what we call therapeutic cancer vaccines. In other words, these are ways of trying to boost a person's immune system that already has cancer using a strategy very similar to the vaccines that we would receive to prevent, an infection. But in this case, you're trying to generate an immune response that now can attack the cancer. So those really should be called therapeutic cancer vaccines as opposed to preventative or prophylactic cancer vaccines. But to your point, do I believe we will have cancer vaccines in the future that will prevent cancer? I think the answer to that is I believe absolutely. We have some examples of that already, but it's really in those cancers that we know are caused by infections. We know if you can effectively protect yourself against those pathogens, those infections, you don't develop the cancers, HPV, hepatitis, and liver cancers. So, but in that case, it's really an infection that we're, a classical vaccine that protects you from the consequences of the infection, one of which can be cancer development. But there's some really intriguing studies, and in fact, some of my colleagues in the field, Michael Taylor and other colleagues, who've been studying the molecular biology of pediatric brain tumors for quite some time. That as they begin to understand where these cancers arise and what cell types they arise in, and some of the unique features that may be associated with those cancers, it's at least conceptually conceivable to think about preventative strategies. I think the likelihood is early detection is probably the next frontier of pushing the envelope of how early can we identify people who are at risk of cancer and detect those cancers, hopefully before they've become even created physical symptoms. Can we develop screening opportunities or biomarkers that we can really detect cancers at a very, very early stage and more effectively intervene? I think that's probably the next sort of pushing of the frontier of preventing cancers. But I do think that the idea that there may be features that we can generate an immune response against, a protective immune response, is certainly plausible, conceivable, and I would think it'll likely be individualized to different cancers, and so you'd have to think about the complexity of doing that. But certainly not beyond the realm of possibilities, and in fact, many people discussing just that concept.
Hearing you talk about early detection as that next frontier, the possibility of a cancer vaccine someday, I'd love for you to finish this sentence, and I'll start it real short and love your thoughts. Without cancer research,
Without cancer research, there is no hope for curing cancer. And I think, you know, that's how I would complete that sentence. But research is obviously a long and involved process. If you're diagnosed with a cancer today, what you need is solutions and help today. And sometimes the concept of research can seem so abstract and prolonged. But the treatments that people are receiving today, and we do cure a lot of patients with cancer that 10, 15, 20 years ago were told that we don't really have options for curative treatment. That has changed. Immunotherapy has been a big part of that for many cancers. But those opportunities and those new treatments came from often decades and decades of research and people building on the foundational knowledge that other researchers had generated to ultimately find those breakthroughs. So I oftentimes say, people became very aware of immunotherapy over the last real 10 years, but historically, the concept of trying to treat cancer using the immune system dates back over 100 years. And I said, so it takes sometimes decades for an overnight success to really come into people's awareness or consciousness. So I think without research, there is no hope for curative treatments. But at the same time, through research, we've seen not just the hope, but the realization of real differences in the outcomes for patients with cancer.
for sure, we've seen the difference. And to your point, each day the work that people like yourself are doing will not only reap dividends in a year, 2 years, but 30 years from now and 40 years from now, which leads me to my next question. What drives your passion for cancer research, pediatric cancer research specifically?
So I got interested in research really in college. I had a long-standing interest in being a physician, and helping, translating my love of science into a way that I thought could help people in a meaningful way. Early on in college, I got like many students, I got exposed to research experiences, to prepare as a pre-med student, and really fell in love with the discovery process of doing research and of trying to find answers to questions that we didn't have answers to at that moment. But it really was the convergence of realizing that the medicine that physicians are practicing today are actually built on the research studies and the hypotheses and the things that people were exploring, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago, that once proven to be effective, then became, standards of treatment. And so I really got excited about the idea of being trained as a physician, but somebody who was going to focus on what would be the treatments that doctors will be delivering, tomorrow. And we don't want it to be 30, 40 years from now. We want it to be 2, 3, today, tomorrow, next year. That's the timeline. There's a sense of urgency because people need solutions today. But I think it's to me really a privilege to come to work every day and hope that you can make a meaningful contribution that will outlive you, that will hopefully have an impact on the field and on people that you will never come across personally, but hopefully some aspect of the research that you've done, if not the breakthrough in your own work, leads to a breakthrough in somebody else's work that really makes a difference for people. So I never get tired of what we're doing. I hope we put ourselves out of business by successfully, solving this problem, and then we'll have to turn our attention to a bigger challenge. But in the interim, I think it's a real privilege to be involved in this work.
Yeah, for sure. And how have you seen cancer research change throughout your career? Where do you see it going in the future? Where, as you said, ideally, we don't need it anymore and we'll be done. Where do you see it 10 years from now, 15 years from now, and how's it changed?
Yeah, so that's a really great question, and so the thing that's probably really exciting for me is I got interested. I read a book actually. When I was heading into college about the concept of cancer immunotherapy. It was written by Dr. Steven Rosenberg, who is the head of the surgery branch at the National Cancer Institute, and it was really a book describing his efforts to treat metastatic melanoma using the immune system. And I was fascinated by the idea that you could, you know, train the body's own immune system to attack cancer. And he had already, even then, had some examples of being able to have patients have, complete responses that were durable, essentially curative responses, using an immune therapy approach. But they were working on really, how to replicate that, how to scale that. And so I got really intrigued and have followed that field. And I've been involved in this research and really watched what was a concept or a possibility and a few anecdotal examples of successes turn into now what's the standard of care treatment for metastatic melanoma, has become a standard of care treatment in many, many other cancers, lung cancer, and watching the field really go from this could be possible to perhaps being, one of the mainstays, certainly one of the mainstays, if not main modalities for treating many aggressive cancers that were called incurable back when I first started in the field. So, my optimism about what's possible is not just sort of a theoretical one. It's really been from having watched how rapidly this field has evolved from the time I got engaged into it to where it is today. And so I think that it's a trajectory that's going to continue in cancer research and cancer treatment. And I really do believe that for brain cancer, which I think has been obviously one of the most challenging, you could argue perhaps there are others, so it's not a comparison. All cancers are serious and significant, but brain cancer has been a particularly challenging one to move the needle in a significant way. But I think just like, now 27, 28 years ago when I was reading about some of these examples of people with prolonged and curative treatments with new approaches. We have those sort of anecdotal, what we call remarkable responders to these new treatments in brain tumor patients today, and so I feel like we're on that same trajectory towards hopefully turning remarkable responders into better understanding of what does that, and now making that a much more common response. So I think for cancer in general and for brain tumor patients, we're going to continue to see improvements in their outcomes, quality of life, and survival.
Well said. And it leads me to my final question. As you know, the V Foundation, our vision is victory over cancer. We've kind of talked about this already. Someday, let's hope we're done. We're rid of cancer. What does victory over cancer mean to you? I mean, it means something a little bit different to everyone. Would love to know what it means to you, victory over cancer.
Well, I think victory over cancer to me would mean that when a person hears that diagnosis that you have cancer, what they experience is, well, I know with all of the modalities and treatments that are available today, I'm going to be okay. And, I think we can think of diseases that devastated populations that we don't even remember today. And ultimately, that's where I'd love to see cancer. I don't know. I personally am motivated by the idea that we can cure these diseases, and we just need to find the solutions that lead to curative treatment. But I also recognize that there are conditions that were, lethal that we now control, and people can live long, long, prosperous lives with a diagnosis, and that can be also a very achievable endpoint. But to me, victory over cancer means when someone hears the diagnosis that you or a loved one has cancer, they say, okay, well, I know I'm going to be okay because of what's available through the research that we've done, through the treatments that we can deliver.
Yeah, and thanks to the research that you're doing, that scientists across the country are doing, there is hope. As you said, without cancer research, there's no hope. With cancer research, there's hope. Keeps that smile on our face knowing there is going to be a better day, and there already are better days as a result. As a final thought, anything you wanted to add that maybe we didn't touch on that you would love our audience to know and learn more about?
Well, I want to thank your audience and all of those who support the V Foundation and allow you to do the support the incredible work that you do support and the research that you're committed to helping carry forward. I do think that in addition to our discussion here, with research, there's not just there is hope, but there's also been tremendous progress, and I think it's the hope of a brighter future is based on the evidence of the results that research has already brought to the field and the progress that has already been made and will continue to be made. So I'm appreciative that we have the opportunity to partner with the V Foundation in this fight, but really want to thank your audience and thank your supporters because they're obviously the ones who make that possible.
Well, thank you, Dr. Mitchell. We really appreciate it and love that final note. When we talked with Coach K at the wine celebration, he hit on the exact point you just hit on. We've won a lot. He put the sports speak on, the coach speak, and he shared we've had a lot of wins in cancer research as a result of the V Foundation and organizations like us. We'll have more in the future. So thank you so much for the great work that you're doing. We look forward to continuing to work with you, see your success, and thanks for taking the time today. We really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thanks so much.